When Robert's mother came into his room, she made a yell that turned her face white. Robert was sat on his chair, wearing her new colander on his head. There were wires taped around its circumference that came together at a metal chain-link collar around his neck, the collar that had belonged to Albert, their long-dead cocker spaniel. Also around his neck was the plastic cone-shaped collar that Albert had worn in the days after his unsuccessful operation. The inside of this collar was lined with cut-open and rolled-flat soda cans, held together with insulating tape. From this collar sprang two more wires, a red and a green one, which went all the way down to Robert's bed, where they were connected to a disemboweled radio. The yelling that Robert's mother did was mainly an exclaimed list of objects. "Your radio! My colander!" and so on. She launched across the room, arms stretched out to rescue her kitchenware from this abuse, stumbling and almost breaking her ankle when the tiny heel of her shoe pressed down and cracked a circuit board, which lay on the floor amongst various electrical debris. "Don't," Robert said. "We're nearly done." At the moment Mrs. Wilson had flung open Robert's bedroom door, Arno had frozen, his fingers applying the last bit of tape to the last wire to hold it in place on the dog's veterinary collar, and there he waited even while Mrs. Wilson came for them, with her bright red nails and lipstick, looking so fresh and ferocious she took his breath away. "Just let him finish," Robert said. Unfinished questions and accusations tumbled out of Mrs. Wilson's mouth as she advanced on them. Switch it on, Robert said. "Don't," Mrs. Wilson said, her fingertips just inches away from the rim of the colander. "You're going to electrocute him." Arno opened his mouth to reassure her that Robert was not plugged into the mains, just a pair of 9-volt batteries. But before he could get any of that out, Robert commanded him to flick the switch again, and in compliance, he flicked. Robert pushed his palms out towards his mother to keep her at bay. From the radio, there came a soft crackling sound, which grew louder as Arno turned up the volume. Mrs. Wilson was jabbing with her finger at Arno, demanding that he switch it off. Robert flapped his hands to extinguish her noise. "Shh," he said. Arno and Robert tilted their ears towards the radio, and when the dial was turned all the way to 10, another sound was discernible. The exploding particles that made up the static were interlaced with a high hum that set everything in the room aquiver. I'm just going to skip ahead to the next bit of the experimentation. "You know," Arno said, "I think I know how to stop your noise." "How?" "Well, I think your whole room, maybe your whole house, is acting like a radio antenna, channeling in radio waves through that cone on your roof." I should explain at that point, they live above an ice cream shop, and there's a giant fiberglass ice cream cone on the roof, which is what's channeling in all these radio waves. "That's why it gets quieter when you get cold." Arno rubbed his hands together, wriggling at the shoulders and the knees, his body in the thrall of this intuitive leap of understanding. "Everything above absolute zero gives off radio waves," he said. "Your body, that chair, the ground outside, New York City all the way over there. The radio waves cause molecules in an antenna to jiggle about. It's that jiggling that gets turned into sounds in the radio, or in your head." "So," Robert dragged out a sound of incomprehension. "So when something's really cold, it doesn't give off so many radio waves, so it gets quieter. That's why your freezer is so quiet." The first time he meets Robert, he's hiding inside the freezer with 7 jumpers on. "How does this help me?" "Let me try something." Mr. Wilson's college sweatshirt came down all the way to Arno's knees. The bell on the end of the red Santa hat he wore, pulled down over his ears, tinkled as he moved about. His nose was running with the cold, and he sniffed frequently. "Well," Arno said. "It's quieter," Robert said, "but it's still there. Can it go any colder?" The light in the centre of Robert's ceiling flickered as Arno turned the thermostat down the whole way. While they waited, they did half an hour of reading practice on one of Robert's X-Men comics, which Arno was much more excited to decode than Horton hears a Who. Throughout the half hour, their breath became more and more dense, the beads of condensation on Robert's window more opaque with frost. The maze of copper pipes with which Arno had constructed a crude extension to the freezer room directly below was complaining. It coughed and rattled, tugging at its tape fastenings behind the big poster of Sean Connery and Dr. No, which did a hugely inadequate job of concealing it. "I can refine it a bit if it works," Arno said. "Make it a bit quieter. I don't think you'll sleep any easier with this noise than the buzzing. So how is it now?" "Still there," Robert said. Arno could already see that this was the case from the graph plotter he had rigged up from a toaster, the movement mechanisms from a Robbie the Robot toy, a disassembled model of the George Washington Bridge, and a tank, the caterpillar tracks of which did the job of pulling in the old envelopes that Arno fed into the machine's slot. The machine was connected via 2 wires to a halo of taped-together chewing gum wrappers around Robert's head. The pencil and the graph plotter drew a slow wave, never varying more than a degree up or down, just a few notches above perfect silence. "Well, don't give up yet," Arno said. "There are other things we can try. This is just stage 1. "Stage 1, Robert said. "What's next?" Arno looked up at the roof. "The pigeons," he said.